Hey everyone, CKY here again today, looking to do another walkthrough. This time we're on Hack the Box and the Machine Beep. Gotta say, I really loved this challenge. It's one of my favourites so far, in all honesty. There was a lot of things going on in here, some local file inclusion. We were using burp to intercept requests and alter those requests a bit and look to escalate into remote code execution. I'm hoping that you will take a lot from this as well. I'll be delighted to take you through this process. What I would say is there is a shorter method to actually completing this challenge. That's not going to be the initial method I'm going to show you because I think there's a lot of learning in this machine. So I may touch on the shorter method towards the end, but let's look to get going on with this. First things first, I'm going to ping the machine just to make sure it's live on the network. And as we can see there, we're getting responses from 10.10.10.7, so we're good to go. We'll do our initial scan. We'll just do a standard nmap scan here. I'm just leaving this on the default ports in aid of time. I would suggest, as always, if you're doing these challenges, that you may want to look at doing a much wider port range to make sure that you don't miss anything. However, in this case, the default ports will be fine. So through video magic, we get our results back promptly. And firstly, we can see here ports 80 and 443 are open. So there's obviously web services running on this, which is very interesting and usually a good place to start. Another thing I'm noticing here is that we've got ports open for IMAP. There's 25 for SMTP. We've got 110 for POP3, so there's mail services running on this machine. So this is another thing that is of particular interest to me in this challenge. So I'm just going to clear the terminal here to make it easier to view. Now, as I said, we did see port 80 and 443 on this, so the machine is running web services. So what I would then look to do at this stage is browse to those services just to see what we can find out. So let's launch a Firefox here and browse to the IP address 10.10.10.7 and see what we get. Now we get presented with a login page here for Elastics. I've actually seen Elastics in my career. It's open source PBX software. So my next step would then be to do a search for any early exploits on this particular software. So I'm just going to use search exploit here to do a search for the term Elastics. I'm also going to use the -W. And what that does is it presents the web link for any exploits so we can easily look into them. I'm looking at the fourth one down here, local file inclusion. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open this link. Now the reason I'm looking at that exploit in particular is we get a clue on the description within Hack the Box itself. It states local file inclusion is actually in this machine. So that's what drew me to this particular exploit. Always need to use any information that we can get from Hack the Box. So if we scroll down here, we can actually see the exploit here. It's actually got the URL, which should leverage the local file inclusion. So I'm not actually going to use the script. I'm just going to copy this URL and I'm going to append it to the page that we have already found to see what sort of results that we get from this. Now also what I'm going to look to do here is start burp. So I'm using Foxy Proxy to redirect my traffic via burp. If you haven't got Foxy Proxy, you'll need to manually input that into your proxy settings of your browser. Although I would suggest that if you don't have Foxy Proxy or are not familiar with it in Firefox, that you Google it and look to get that installed. It really does help. And when we get into burp here, I'm going to go to proxy and turn the intercept off because we don't need it. Switch to the HTTP history tab because that's the one that we're initially going to need. Just close that update there. And what I'm going to do here is just paste that URL in. We can go ahead with the security warnings here. And as we can see, there's a lot of text on screen, quite difficult to decipher. This is why I'm going to put this through burp, because if we click on the link here and then we scroll down, I'm going to try and make this window a bit bigger to make it easier for us to view the contents. Apologies there for the delay. As I'm scrolling down here, it's still quite difficult to read, so let me go away and flip the view. So here we go. As we can see, the formatting of this file is far easier for us to read, and we can actually see that there's some usernames and passwords listed within this file here as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy that password to get a note of it. And just before we move on here, I do think it's worth recapping exactly what we've done. So what we've done is use local file inclusion to get a password from a configuration file. Now all local file inclusion is abusing the include statements of one file to include the contents of another file. So what I'm now going to look to do is return to the Elastic's login, and we're going to try the credentials that we have gained from our local file inclusion. So we'll use the username admin and simply paste the password in and proceed from there. Now once I've gained access to a system like this with the credentials we've got, I'd normally be looking to upload a reverse shell script, but I can tell you that's not an option here. So what I'm then thinking is, how can we get a file or content on there that might allow us to exploit PHP and run potential remote code execution? Email service is running there. We saw lots of email ports before, so I'm immediately thinking, let's try and get an email on this system with some syntax in there so we can abuse it. So what we're going to do is telnet to port 25 on this machine, and then we're going to send an email. So we'll do telnet 10.10.10.7 port 25. And the first command we're going to run is an ehlo to establish the domain that we're sending from. I'm just going to use test.com. Any domain name is fine there. So we've established our initial connection. Next, we're going to do a vrfy to verify our recipient. Now I've got asterisk at localhost here. We know from the config file there's a username called asterisk, although I had to do a bit of trial and error to find out the exact name. But let's just test this. It says it's good, but if we use a deliberately wrong email address here, as you can see, you will get a recipient rejected. Following that, we'll use the command mail from, and we'll just say test.com. We will then use the command rcpt2 to identify the recipient, which is asterisk at localhost. We will then use the command data, which will allow us to then enter our data for the email. So we'll just say subject, I'm just going to call it exploit. And then for the body of the message, I'm going to put some syntax in here that will hopefully allow us to abuse PHP and launch commands remotely against this system once we use the local file inclusion against this email. Okay? So we can take a note of the syntax here. So once we complete our syntax here and hit return, we finish with a single dot. The message is queued, so we can return to burp. And what I'm going to do here is take the original request and send to repeater. Now once we have this in repeater here, I'm going to take the original local file inclusion syntax. I'm going to do a quick test and change this to /etc/passwd just to confirm we can read other files. Send that request. I'll change the screen layout here. And as we can see from the response here, we can in fact read other files. Following that, we need to try and read the email directory, which I had to research a bit. So if we change this to /var/mail/***, and then we send that command. And what we should see on the right hand side here is the email that we sent with the PHP syntax in it. We can see subject exploit, so we've successfully managed to upload this onto our target. So our next step is to test if we have remote code execution. So after the word action, we'll add an ampersand, cmd equals ls. And if we send this, on the right hand side, we get the original email back plus the directory listing contents. And this proves that we now have remote code execution as well. This is fantastic. Okay, so at this point, I would actually say that we've done the bulk of the hardest work. We know we've got remote code execution, so all I'm going to look to do now is look to execute a command which will get us a reverse shell. Now, in order to do this, I'm going to turn off my proxy here, on Foxy Proxy, and then I'm going to do a search for payloads all things on GitHub. And I'm simply going to pull down some syntax that will get us a reverse shell. So our first result is the one we're looking for, Swiss key repo. I'm then going to look for the methodology and resources, and then the reverse shell cheat sheet. And all I'm looking for here is a bash command for a reverse shell. So we're going to take the first entry here. I'm going to copy that to the clipboard. And then what I'm going to look to do is paste that into the decoder part of Burp Suite. Now, because this command has got spaces in it, we need to URL encode this command. So firstly, let's look to change the IP address to our local host. I'll put in my IP address here, you put in the IP address local to you. And I'll also change the port to 2222 out of habit. And then we move to encode as and change it to URL. And all we need to do is copy the entire contents of this line, copy that, back to repeater, remove the ls command, and paste our URL encoded command in here. Now before we click send, we need to start our listener. So let's return to our terminal here. Start up a listener on port 2222. And then we can go back to burp and we can send our command. And once we've clicked send, if we return to the terminal, we can see that we've caught our reverse shell. I'll do a who am I, and as we can see, I'm the user asterisk. Now we need some privesc. So I'm immediately jumping to sudo-l to see if we have any sudo permissions. And from the results, the one that sticks out to me here is nmap. Now I know how we can escape nmap to get root privileges, but in order to go through the process, if we open a browser and search for GTFO bins, we'll click on the link we get there. And I'm simply going to do a search in the box here for nmap. Click on the sudo link here, and as we can see, here's the syntax for breaking out of nmap. So from here, let's look to return to our terminal and use this syntax in order to do some privilege escalation. We're going to do sudo nmap -- interactive. And following that, we will simply do an exclamation mark sh. And if we now do a who am I, we have root. So upon obtaining root, we can simply browse into the required directories to get the flags. I'll clear the terminal, change directory into the home directory. We have the Fanis directory here, change into that. We can see the user.txt file, and to view it we would simply cat that file. Now I'm not going to do that because I'd like you to go through the process. Let's do a cd to go into the root folder, list it there, and as we can see, root.txt there. Again, cat the file to view the contents, and I'll let you do that again. Now at the outset of this machine, I did say there was a quicker way to complete this, so let's look to go through this now. I'm going to clear the terminal here to make it easier to view. Now the quick way of completing this machine basically involves harnessing the password that we gathered from our local file inclusion from the config file earlier. It's in the description of the box that password repetition is used, so what we're going to do is look to abuse SSH and password repetition. So let's SSH to the machine here with the root user. And when we do this, we will see we get an unable to negotiate error message. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the first entry here, because we can actually force our client to use whichever we want. So copy the first entry listed there. We'll do SSH-O. We'll do KEX algorithms, key exchange algorithms equals, paste the entry in there. Do root at 10.10.10.7, and when we hit return, we see that we get prompted for the password, and if we use the password that we got from the Elastic's config file, we will see that we gain root. I'll do a who am I to confirm this, and it states that we have root. We have now owned this machine. Now, I do appreciate that the latter method that we just used was far quicker and simpler than the former method. However, going through local file inclusion, researching that and escalating that to remote code execution, I found extremely interesting and also valuable. It was very, very good, and this is why I found this one of the most interesting boxes that I have done so far. I would really encourage you to go down that path, look into it for yourself to understand the concepts involved, and hopefully you can take away from this as much as what I have. To finish off, really, I'd like to thank you for viewing. If you have found this beneficial, I really would appreciate it if you could maybe add a like. Simple thing to do, really, but I would appreciate it. And yeah, thanks again, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.